All right, in this video we're going to talk about the process that we use when we're problem solving with inequalities. Basic approach, and this is very similar to the approach that we used when we were problem solving with equations. We're going to go through kind of this step-by-step approach to make sure that we're doing our best to solve these problems. First thing we want to do, we want to read the problem carefully, figure out what it's asking us to find. Then after that, we want to assign a variable to the quantity we're trying to find, if one hasn't already been defined. Sometimes we see problems where they tell us, let the letter D stand for depth, and then we don't need to worry about assigning a variable ourselves. The third step then, we want to write down what the variable represents. Again, if they tell you what the variable represents in the problem, that's not a big concern for us. Then we want to reread the problem, and we want to write an inequality based off of the quantities that were given in the problem, using, our common sense and our experiences to take the words that are in the problem and break them down into something that we can write as an inequality. Then we're going to solve the inequality, and we're going to make sure we answer the question. So that's the process. So let's look at a couple of problems here quickly. And of course, when we look at these problems, there's always a wide variety of potential situations that we can look at in problem solving. And I certainly don't want to go through 25 or 30 different examples to talk about this concept. So a big key for you is going to be to apply the ideas that we use here in order to handle any type of problem that could occur. So let's take a look at this problem. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to read this problem carefully. So I'm going to read through it. Glenn is the manager of the meat department at Dutchway. He needs to schedule employees to staff the meat department for at least 310 person hours per week. Glenn has one part-time employee that works 30 hours per week. Each full-time employee works 40 hours per week. Determine the number of full-time employees Glenn must schedule so that his employees will work at least 310 person hours per week. Okay, so what am I trying to find? I'm trying to determine the number of full-time employees that Glenn must schedule. Okay, so that's going to be my variable. I'm going to let X stand for the number of full-time employees. So I've defined what my variable is, and I've written down what it stands for. So that's going to be part of our inequality, is the number of full-time employees. Okay, so let's go through the information again. The only real important piece of information we need in the first set of sentences here is that he needs to schedule employees for at least 310 person hours per week. So that means 310 would be good, 311, 315, basically any number greater than or equal to 310. Notice how I kind of reasoned my way through there what at least 310 meant, because that really tells me how to set up the beginning of this inequality. We need the hours to be greater than or equal to 310. Now, let's see what else we have. Glenn has one part-time employee that works 30 hours per week, and he's got a bunch of full-time employees that work 40 hours per week. So if he had one full-time employee working, they would work 40 hours. If he had two, they would work 80 hours. So what we need to do in here is take the number of full-time employees times that 40 hours a week that they work, and that gives us the number of hours worked by the full-time employees. So that's 40 times X. And he also has that one part-time employee that works 30 hours, so we need to add their hours into the total. And now we have our inequality written to solve this equation, this scenario, and now we're going to solve it. We'll subtract 30 from both sides and divide both sides by 40, and we get that X is greater than or equal to 7. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the number of, because remember, X is the number of full-time employees, the number of full-time employees has to be at least 7. So I'm now going to answer my question. Glenn needs at least 7 full-time employees. And now we've solved that problem using these techniques. All right, let's do one more. Yellow cab taxi charges a $2.50 flat rate in addition to 70 cents per mile. Rebecca has no more than $15 to spend on a ride. How far can Rebecca travel without exceeding her budget? So I've read it pretty carefully. We're looking for how far can Rebecca travel. Okay, and so when we define our variable, we're going to let our variable stand for the number of miles that Rebecca travels. I'm going to write that down. X equals number of miles Rebecca travels. And the situation that we have here is that, she's going to pay to get in the taxi cab, and then depending on how far she goes, we're going to have to pay additional amounts for each, additional mile that she travels in the taxi cab. And it says here that she has no more than $15 to spend on a ride. So that means that what she spends has to be less than or equal to $15. That gets us started writing our inequality. Now they're going to charge her $2.50 to get in, and then 70 cents for each mile. So we're going to take 70 cents times the number of miles. And there's our inequality that represents this scenario. And now we want to go about solving it. So I'm going to subtract $2.50 from both sides. And then I'm going to divide both sides by that 70 cents. Break out my calculator here. 12.5 divided by 0.7. X is less than or equal to 17.857, etc., etc. 17.857. And all that repeats. All those decimal digits aren't really going to matter for us. So, because the cab charges 70 cents per mile, every time you go over to a new mile, say you drive 17.1 miles, they're going to charge you for 18. So this right here says that Rebecca can travel at most 17 miles. All right. So notice the process we went through here solving these inequalities. We read through the problem. We looked for what variable we were trying to establish, what we were looking for in the problem. Then we named that variable, and after we named that variable, we reread, we wrote our inequality, solved it, and answered the question. All right, that ends this video. See you guys next time.